Really hope you enjoyed the film. I certainly enjoyed spending my time down here at Longford. It was a really exciting shoot to go on. Different though, you know, I've done a lot of river carping over the years, sometimes with great success, sometimes with zero success. Rivers can be very difficult, and that's primarily down to the fact that they're usually very low stocked and the fact that they can run over miles and miles and miles. And Longford was no exception to that. We're talking about approximately 26 miles of river in total, made up of the main sort of Hampshire Avon itself, lots of carriers, backwaters, and within that there was sort of pools and eddies and big bends and shallow bits and deep bits, and a vast amount of it almost inaccessible, which made sort of tracking down any fish or covering ground and finding them extremely difficult. Because of the nature of Longford and the way it's sort of set out across acres and acres and acres of estate, it made my approach into this particular river campaign, I suppose, somewhat different to campaigns previously. A lot of river fishing historically had been on, I don't want to say it, but yeah, slightly more boring, slightly more canalised, deep, slow, maybe lock to lock to lock, and you could kind of find out where the fish were in a particular stretch. You could focus your attention there. You could go in with pre-baiting campaigns that sometimes would happen weeks or months before I'd even fish. But yeah, coming here to Longford, it was very different. The water clarity was incredible. As I say, getting around was extremely difficult, and of course it was low stocked, but I was super up for the challenge, and here's how I went about catching the carp I did during Borrowed Time Part 3. Over the years, there has been plenty of times where I've just tipped up at a bit of river, maybe seen a fish or two, and used an opportunist approach and caught them. However, the vast amount of my river fishing over the years has been about getting something going, locating areas of the river where the fish like to spend great amounts of time, introducing bait time and time again, getting them revisiting them areas, and then, you know, hitting it quite hard with the fishing at prime times. Longford was very different. I basically got the ticket, joined, and we immediately started making the film, so there was no opportunity at all to do any pre-baiting. Of course I would have liked that. It is a massive asset to you in any form of fishing if you can get some free food in there, get them feeding confidently before you actually put a rig in. But that opportunity wasn't available. It meant coming down here and from the off, literally on June the 15th itself, going exploring for the first time. And it was incredibly exciting, pushing my way through the nettles, peering through the trees, getting in the river itself in the waders. The river at that time of the year was choked with weed, cabbages, you know, so that as well made spotting fish very difficult. Of course, through my time here at Longford, there were times when I'd sit it out, sit on my hands, wait for one to come along. Sometimes they did, more than often than not, they didn't. So the tactic that really worked well for me was staying on my toes, was going around and exploring. To be able to do that effectively, you really need to strip your gear back. If you've got loads of tackle with you that's heavy and burdening you down, it makes you lazy, it makes you complacent, and you don't end up getting into those nooks and crannies and really understanding the river and its full potential. So to be super effective and cover the most amount of ground possible, I had to strip everything right back. So just a recon rucksack, scope unhooking mat, couple of baiting pouches, bite alarms, landing net, and of course my scope rods. The recon rucksack was the perfect size for this particular campaign. It's got two external pockets that allow me to store things like my wallet, my phone, keys, small pots of pop-ups, some cultured hook baits, and then the main compartment itself would be my workbox with all my terminal tackle items inside, and really importantly, plenty of water, a few snacks to get me through the day. Yeah, just the ideal size to sling on your back and carry everything you need. The unhooking mat, of course, was there as an unhooking mat, but it also doubled up perfectly as something to sit on if I was crouched down in amongst nettles and brambles. Two storm poles with the bite alarms on. They were 26" in length, which allowed me to, if needed, really elevate them right up and position my rods over the top of reeds, a landing net, and of course the rods. I actually started off the campaign using 3-pound scopes, but very quickly changed that to 3.5. Like I say, the weed, the cabbages, the ranunculus, the snags, the branches, the flow, everything needs to be really strong and reliable in the river, and I felt a lot more comfortable when I switched from the 3s to the 3.5s for this particular fishing. Once that main gear was packed away, my bed, my barrow and my hide, I was good to go for the day, and off I'd go. Glasses, crucial, absolutely super important to be able to see, and a lot of energy. You really can't underestimate, how much effort you're putting into something like this. I'm literally walking all day, I'm looking all day. It's mentally draining, it's physically draining. Yeah, you're constantly on your toes. And off I'd go, first thing in the morning. I'd go there, here, there, everywhere. And importantly along the way, baiting. Sometimes, yes, I could find fish, but a lot of the time I was using the bait, introducing it onto a clear area or strips down in amongst the weed, and then revisiting that spot 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour later, and just checking if there was any signs of fish. That was the biggest edge I had while I was down here. Staying mobile, staying active, introducing bait into lots of different spots, not lots of bait, just a little handful, or maybe a few 24 millers. So if I'd return, there'd still be remnants of bait there and hopefully fish feeding. That was my big indicator whether the fish were present or not, if they were actually there feeding on some of the free bait I'd introduced. When I was going around baiting lots of areas to try and identify, is there any carp present in that particular zone, this was the mix I was using. It's what I would call a grubbing around mix, exactly the same as I'd use on a lake, on a canal, in England, right across Europe for small carp and big carp. It's my kind of go-to grubbing around mix. There's various different particle sizes in it that are a various different weight, everything from literally dust right up to sort of 15 or maybe even 20 mil boilies. I'd introduce it in, and the hemp, for example, or the flake, that would rush off downstream through the stream of weed, creating lots of attraction, pulling fish up onto it. The bigger bits would sort of settle down in amongst the gravel. Some of it would get trapped in the weeds, some of it would get caught in crevices in the gravel, but literally right through a swim, I'd be baiting an entire area with various different food items, particle sizes, and in different colours. In the mix, there was plenty of liquids. Again, they will wash further downstream, pulling fish up. And when I'm talking about fish, I'm not just talking about the carp here. I wanted the full party. I wanted the roach, the dace, the chub, the trout, the bream, everything coming in and creating that almost pyramid situation where eventually the carp will not be able to resist it and they will come in to investigate further. Of course, by that point, a lot of the smaller particles, the hemp and the flake, they will have been eaten by the smaller fish, but that's why it's important that you've got some of those bigger bits in there, so there's always food items when the carp do turn up. And finally, I made sure there was various different colours in there. You've got the black in the hemp, you've got the sort of burnt orange of the tigers, the bright yellow of the sweet corn, and interestingly, once the squid's been in there a little while, it almost goes quite a pale, creamy white. And that does two things. It offers different colour options for the fish with regards to preference, but most importantly, it allows me to identify, has all the bait gone when I revisit the spots. Some of the spots could be quite deep, maybe a metre and a half, and it was sometimes a little bit difficult to see if the bait had been gone over the top of gravel, but when you've got things in there like tigers, or the squid that's been washed out, it's very easy to identify had it all been completely cleared out or not. As well as the grabbing around mix, there was a second bait mix that I utilised during my time here. And that was primarily at the end of a session, almost as a form of pre-bait, or throughout a session, maybe first thing in the morning or going into a night session where I'd bait with just bigger items, which mainly consisted of 24 mil boilies or tiger nuts. This was to try and make it a little bit more nuisance fish proof. It didn't really work. I could fish a 24 mil boilie and still catch chub. I could fish double tigers and still pick up bream. But it certainly slowed those nuisance fish bites down. I'd go around and bait this in a bit of a larger quantity, maybe half a kilo, 3/4 of a kilo onto an area, leave that throughout the day, knowing full well that these larger boilies weren't getting snaffled by the dace or the chub or the roach. To further boost the boilies and make them really, really attractive, I'd add to them some of the salted squid. Again, that would seep into the baits themselves, holding the baits before releasing further downstream, bringing the fish up to that area, and then absolutely dust them off with some of the stick mix. Just one bait alone dropped into a swim would release attraction for potentially hours as those sort of oils, liquids and attractors seep back out along with the dust. Again, into there, I'd add some tiger nuts. So this, as I say, was more of a pre-baiting approach rather than going around and instantly trying to catch fish by applying small amounts of the grabbing around mix onto likely looking areas. And I think the final important aspect of catching some lovely carp down here at Longford was just making sure I was presented. It wasn't that I used a fancy rig or a particular technical aspect to my angling. It was just making sure I wasn't casted into the middle of the cabbages or tangled up in amongst some of the branches down there. It was just ensuring that at all points I was fishing, and even more importantly, I was concealing everything as well as I possibly could. As I say, the water clarity was incredible. The fish was super spooky of absolutely everything, and I needed to put 110% effort into making sure I was presented and making sure everything was concealed. When you're fishing on a lake, good presentation is of course very, very important, but it's not difficult to cast out, sink your line, possibly incorporate a flying back lead, add back leads in. Yeah, once you're sort of out there and fishing, if you've got your line sunk down, everything's nice and concealed. In a river, it's never that easy. You've of course got the flow, you've got stuff coming down with the flow. Those things are trying to knock your rig out of position, potentially they are. Yeah, it's a lot more problematic to get your line concealed and down and leave it out there for prolonged periods of time without it being disturbed by debris and stuff coming down the river. But there was no real set way. Some of the situations I found myself in at Longford, I was fishing literally off the rod tip onto really polished gravel areas. In those particular situations, it was no problem to use a very conventional rig, nice and short, inline lead, fluorocarbon leader, armour link, hook link, lower that down into position, possibly drop a small back lead off the tip just to pin this fluoro down a little bit further. Yeah, very much like fishing a gravel spot in a lake. However, when I was fishing out into the main river itself, things became a lot more problematic. The first thing, I had to elevate my rod up nice and high to try and keep as much of my main line out of the water as possible. That would then be fished down to a lead clip, but I couldn't fish the short hook link because what you would find would happen, you'd get a build-up of debris, weed, on your main line itself that would come down to the lead and the lead clip. It would start to mask the hook link. So I had to really lengthen my hook link to allow the build-up of stuff around the lead and the lead clip, but not around the hook bait itself. And this would mean I could keep the rig out in position for maybe 2 or 3 hours before I'd actually have to recast. On that first night on June the 15th, I started messing around with big KD, size 2 Fang X's, double 24mm baits, and very, very quickly realised it wasn't the one. So I reverted back to what I know and what always works for me, the Slip D rig. Size 5 twister, either a bait screw where I'd mount onto it a cultured hook bait, or a micro hook ring swivel with a little length of arm length where I'd put a single or a double tiger nut on, down to a kicker just to help turn the hook itself, and then depending on the situation, some 25 or 35 pound armour link. So nothing fancy, the same rig I've used for years now. I paid a lot of attention to the hook link length, and most importantly made sure everything was strong, reliable, and my hook was really sharp. I've mentioned there was plenty of fish caught, chub, bream, and of course carp, and sometimes I'd be up right through the night catching those, which meant I'd often be replacing my rig. If I got the opportunity in the day to sit down for half an hour, maybe into dark even, I'd always make maximum effort to tie up half a dozen rigs ready for the night ahead in case I got plenty of bites. So in summary, if you fancy giving river carping a go, always remember to try and stay mobile, do everything you can to find those fish, make sure you've got an adequate supply of bait and something there that's big enough that once everything else has been eaten, there's still something there for the carp to eat. And finally, make sure your rigs are strong, reliable, and you're always presented and you're always fishing. Good luck.